Audio made possible by www.jackettome.com. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 20. Coco Hidden Middles. Bella's point of view. When Esme pulled up to the CTAC airport, it was already almost dark out. She pulled me into a huge hug, telling me ridiculous things like how proud she was of me, and asking me if I was okay. I was thinking my physical appearance probably hadn't fared very well. She let me go with a big kiss and tears in her eyes. And I really tried to smile at her, but I don't really think I managed it completely. She seemed to understand. Every mile we got closer to Forks, I grew more tired. My eyelids were heavy from not sleeping, and so many tears I didn't have any left. I pulled down the visor mirror to look at my eyes for the first time in days. It was bad. They were swollen underneath, and a dark purple that went all the way around my bloodshot eyes. I looked awful. Esme kept glancing at me sideways and telling me about all the things I had missed while I was away. She was worried. And I wished I could have reassured her in some way that I was okay. But I just couldn't. So I laid my head back on the seat and just watched all the trees blow by while she talked. When we pulled up to the house, I didn't look at it first. I looked at the Cullen mansion. I couldn't see Edward's window from the front, but the entire house was still lit up. It was barely 8. I slowly dragged myself out of the car, trying to slam the door, but only having the strength for a small click. Esme grabbed my suitcase and walked in while I trudged behind her heavily with my hood up and my head down. It was a Friday, and Alice was waiting for me in the kitchen, bouncing up and down with an enthusiasm that almost made me want to smile. Almost. Unfortunately, when she took one glance at my face, her smile died and fell. I hated that I was the one to kill her enthusiasm. She was all dressed up, and I worked an eyebrow at her provocative dress. She cleared her throat daintily. "I have a date," she chirped, trying to smile at me genuinely, but I could still see the concern in her eyes. I rolled my eyes. "Jasper," I rasped, flinching at the sound of my rough voice. Her smile fell more before she attempted to perk it back up and nod. I let out a very unauthentic chuckle that just sounded empty. But it was the best I could do. Alice threw herself at me, nearly knocking me over with a hug I didn't think her size capable of. I hugged her back, and sent her my best smile, taking my suitcase to my room. But it was dark, and I didn't want to go in, so I just shoved it through the doorway and closed the door again. I dragged my feet to the kitchen, deciding I would just really like to cook something again. Esme and Alice sat at the island, and watched me cook, telling me about how they heated up all the food I made, and how good it was. I got that same feeling as when I first moved here. Like everyone was walking on eggshells around me, trying not to upset me. I hated it. I love it. I kept stealing glances out the kitchen window, at the big white gazebo. For some reason expecting to see him out there. Which was really stupid. I began wondering if he would be okay if I came tonight at 10, like always. If he was anywhere near as tired as I was. "Esme," I rasped, turning around to face her sitting in a stool. She met my gaze, so I continued, clearing my sore throat softly. "I'm going to the library early tomorrow, to look for some books. I crafted an alibi just in case everything went perfect. So I might be gone by the time you wake up. And I probably won't be home until afternoon," I croaked. My voice was still scratchy, and sounded as awful as I felt. She nodded at me with a sweet smile. I hated lying to Esme, but at the moment, I couldn't really care. Alice left at night to go meet up with Jasper, and I began baking cookies after Esme went to bed. Coco Hidden Middles. The hidden middle was minty cream. I didn't know if Edward wanted me to come, or if I was even welcome anymore. But I was going to go anyways. I had nothing at all to lose. So at 10, I packed my bag with food, cookies, and the sketchbook, and stumbled out the door. I was so tired I couldn't even walk straight. It was cold out, and a fine mist was lingering. I looked towards Edward's room and noticed his light was still on. With a deep breath, I drew my hood up and began stumbling across the yard to the Cullens. I climbed the lattice carefully with really bad coordination. My limbs all felt like mush. It took 3 times as long to reach the balcony as usual. I dragged my heavy legs over the railing, landing soundlessly, but clumsily. I took a moment to appreciate the skill required to accomplish such a climb in my condition. I could barely stand. I turned toward the glass French doors, all lit up, without any sound coming from inside, and lifted a heavy fist, knocking once, and only once, because when the first knock hit, the door flew open. Edward was standing in the doorway of the big bright room, wearing his usual plain black t-shirt and dark jeans. His hair was hanging all in his face, and his eyes looked nearly as bad as mine. Dark purple and bloodshot, drooping heavily. He was tired. He was staring at me blankly again, not blinking. I bit my lip lazily, feeling too tired to even put in the effort required to do it all the way, and just stared back. A gust of wind came from behind me and rustled Edward's hair out of his face momentarily. "Hi," I whispered softly, my legs feeling very heavy. Edward seemed frozen in the doorway, just staring at me with those tired blank eyes. I was starting to get worried that I did the wrong thing by even coming. And before I could question whether or not he wanted me to stay, he held his hand out without breaking my gaze. I dropped my drooping eyes to his upturned palm, and without hesitation lifted mine, and slid it into it. And before I knew what was happening, Edward pulled me into the room quickly, sliding off my hood, and wrapping his arms around my waist so tightly it lifted me off the ground. And I just collapsed in his arms, so tired and exhausted, and just glad to be home again. I threw my arms around his neck, and buried my face in his shoulder, taking big gulps of his scent in greedily. He had his face buried into the crook of my neck, breathing in just like I was. I brought my hand up and cupped the top of his head, tangling my fingers into his messy hair with a sigh. He squeezed me tighter, nearly hurting my ribs, but I didn't care. My feet were dangling off the ground, and I was so happy he had the strength to hold me up, because all of mine was gone.
"I miss the shit out of you,"
Edward whispered into neck, squeezing me tighter, as if to emphasize the fact. And I smiled. I finally, really, truly smiled into his shoulder. "I miss the shit out of you too," I slurred, still smiling, and just happy that it was even possible to smile again. Edward turned his face into my neck, and planted a soft kiss to it. And I smiled more. Big and goofy, surely, and squeezed his neck as tight as I could with the energy I had left. And without another word, he turned us around and shut the door with his foot. And then he carried me to the bed, and sat me down on the edge, pulling away from me and kneeling in front of me eye level.
"You look so fucking tired,"
he sighed, lifting a finger and stroking the swollen bags under my eyes. I let my eyes flutter closed as he touched me, reveling in the electricity I had missed, and nodded heavily. Tired was an understatement. I felt him stand up and take the 2 straps of my book bag from my shoulder, sliding them off my arms and taking it off my back. I opened my eyes once it was off, and he just put it on the couch and walked back to the bed. He flopped down in the center behind me, and I just scooted back, knowing that we both needed it before anything else could possibly be done or said. No alarm. I slid and scooted drowsily to my side of the bed, not even bothering to take off my shoes, and I lied down. But Edward sat up, leaned down the bed to my side, and grabbed my feet, untied each of my shoes, and slid them off. "Thanks," I slurred, watching him throw them on the ground. He just smiled at me, and I had to smile back, because I was so happy to see that smile again. Without another word he laid down on his side of the bed, and turned the lamp off. I didn't even have the energy to roll over all the way, so he brought his arms around me and pulled me to the center.